This was the moment when a routine day on the slope suddenly spiraled into chaos, when a chairlift at Georgia's Gadori ski resort malfunctioned and began racing backward down the mountain. The lift reversed at high speed, smashing chairs together at the bottom terminal and violently throwing riders to the ground, while others were forced to jump to avoid being crushed by swinging metal seats. Screams erupted as people piled at the base of the lift, with some narrowly missing being struck by flying chairs and bodies. At least 8 people were seriously injured, including tourists from several countries, with reported injuries ranging from broken limbs to head and spinal trauma. Investigators later concluded the rollback was triggered by an electrical failure, which was only worsened by operator error after emergency procedures were not properly followed. In the aftermath, the lift operator was suspended and resort managers were forced to resign. Criminal and civil investigations later followed, examining how a system designed to keep riders safe turned into a death trap within seconds. This was the moment a man attempted to rob a small loans office in Kazakhstan, smashing through thin laminated safety glass at the receptionist's window. He then quickly climbed inside, grabbed the female clerk, and threatened her with a knife to force her cooperation. He stole about $340 before fleeing, but police arrested him later that same day. Authorities confirmed he was eventually prosecuted and ultimately sentenced to 7 years in prison for the robbery, while the clerk managed to escape unharmed. This person looked over the balcony of their high-rise apartment building to realize they owned a cat, not a pussy. Here's a clip of a man trapped inside a grain silo with thousands of pounds of grain pressing in from every direction. What makes this situation so horrifying is that grain doesn't behave like a solid. Once it starts moving, it flows like liquid, pulling a person under like quicksand. Within seconds, someone can be buried up to their chest, and struggling only makes it worse. By this point, self-rescue is nearly impossible. The pressure restricts breathing, and panic speeds up suffocation. The only real chance of survival is to stop moving and hold a small pocket of air around your face, keeping your head above the grain until rescuers arrive. Accordingly, dozens of farmers die every year in this exact way due to grain entrapment. Austin Chumley Russell is best known as the laid-back fan favorite on Pawn Stars, but his life briefly veered off course in 2016 when police raided his Las Vegas home during a sexual assault investigation. The SA allegations were later dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the search uncovered a loaded firearm along with methamphetamine, marijuana, and Xanax. Chum was arrested and later pleaded guilty to a felony weapons charge and a misdemeanor drug charge, receiving probation, counseling, and rehab instead of prison time. He later cleaned up his life, lost 150 pounds, stayed on the show, and has spoken openly about focusing on his health and sobriety afterward. In 2010, an undercover journalist working for the dissident outlet Asia Press smuggled out rare footage from North Korea showing a severely malnourished 23-year-old homeless woman who said she survived by eating grass. Her voice was so weak that the reporter couldn't clearly record her name, and her identity has never been verified. Months later, local contacts reported she was found dead in a nearby cornfield, believed to have collapsed from starvation while desperately trying to eat raw corn. North Korea's state media never acknowledged the footage, but defectors reported heightened surveillance and crackdowns in the area afterward, with anyone suspected of leaking information facing severe punishment. This was the moment when a hang gliding instructor realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. In November of 2018 in Switzerland, American tourist Chris Gursky had just taken off on a tandem hang gliding flight when he and the instructor immediately noticed that Gursky was not attached to the safety harness at all. The instructor immediately attempted an emergency stop, but strong winds instead lifted the glider higher into the air, sending them soaring hundreds of feet above the ground. With no safety line and no way to land immediately, Gursky was left dangling with nothing securing him to the aircraft. He was forced to cling to the metal frame with his hands while also desperately gripping the instructor to avoid falling. For more than 2 minutes, Gursky held on for dear life as his arms visibly shook and his grip weakened, fully aware that giving in to the pain would mean certain death. The entire ordeal was captured on video as the instructor desperately fought the wind and steered toward an emergency landing. When they finally reached the ground, Gursky collapsed in pain and was later diagnosed with a fractured wrist and torn bicep from hanging on so tightly. Authorities ruled the accident a serious safety failure, fining the instructor and suspending his license, while the footage became a chilling reminder of how one small misstep turned a fun recreational flight into a life-threatening nightmare. In February of 2025, 22-year-old Daniel Waterman was left comatose after a violent interstate crash in Florida, leaving him with severe head and spinal injuries. After briefly regaining consciousness months later, he told investigators the crash was intentional, alleging that his pregnant girlfriend, 24-year-old Leah Mumby, deliberately drove the car into a tree during an argument, accelerating as he tried to escape and telling him, "I don't care what happens, you'll get what you deserve." Mumby initially said she did not remember what happened before the crash. Waterby died from his injuries in October of 2025, and prosecutors later upgraded her charges to vehicular homicide. In 1962, the United States detonated a nuclear warhead in space during the Starfish Prime test, exploding it about 250 miles above Earth. The blast was far more destructive than expected, knocking out or damaging multiple satellites, creating artificial radiation belts that lingered for years, and causing electrical failures as far away as Hawaii. The test proved that nuclear explosions in space were unpredictable and capable of long-term damage to both technology and Earth's near-space environment, effectively ending any further attempts once scientists realized the harm could not be controlled.
Somebody screamed, "Call the police," and I said no, and I just fired the gun, and this big noise went off, and then I grabbed the phone and got the hell out of there. But I wasn't even in that room. I mean, it just was an explosion. I moved, they moved, the gun went off, and it was like, ah, and it was that fast.
That was Betty Broderick on the witness stand, describing how she shot her ex-husband and his new wife as they slept. On November 5, 1989, the 41-year-old broke into the San Diego home of renowned attorney Dan Broderick and fatally shot him and his wife Linda Kolkena in their bed before turning herself in the next morning. The killings followed a bitter years-long divorce, marked by accusations of infidelity, emotional abuse, and financial control. Betty had supported Dan through medical and law school, only to be discarded for his much younger assistant, who later became his wife. As the marriage unraveled, her behavior escalated, including vandalizing his home, ramming her car into his front door, and multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. Although Betty claimed she only meant to confront the couple, prosecutors played recorded calls in which she said she wished Dan would just die. She was ultimately convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years to life. This was the moment a normal day at a busy restaurant nearly turned into a child abduction. Without warning, a man later identified as Nasim Slamang vaulted over a railing and grabbed a young girl by the neck as she sat with her family, attempting to pull her away in front of stunned onlookers. But before he could escape, restaurant owner Dishal Suku, a trained jiu-jitsu black belt, rushed in, tackled the suspect to the ground, and restrained him until police arrived. Slamang was arrested and later prosecuted for the attempted kidnapping, while the family was left shaken by how close the child came to vanishing within seconds. This is exactly why you should always test the waters before swimming in the streets of Thailand after a massive flood. Severe flooding hit Thailand in November of 2025 after days of heavy rain, with water rising more than 20 feet in some areas and swallowing entire neighborhoods within hours. The floods came so fast that many residents were trapped without food for days, and more than 100 people were reported killed across the region. As water displaced wildlife and habitats, massive snakes, including pythons, were seen swimming through streets and entering homes seeking higher ground alongside terrified residents. This footage shows former Nazi concentration camp guard Joseph Schutz covering his face as he arrived at a German courtroom in 2022. At 101 years old, Schutz became the oldest person ever tried and convicted for Holocaust-era crimes. Prosecutors argued that while serving as an SS guard at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp between 1942 and 1945, he knowingly assisted in the systematic murder of at least 3,500 prisoners. Schutz claimed he did absolutely nothing wrong and was not aware of the gruesome crimes being carried out at the camp. He was convicted as an accessory to murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he remained free while appealing the verdict. Schutz died in April of 2023 before serving his sentence. Angie Barlow, a British woman with a severe fear of dentists, avoided professional dental care for roughly a decade by repeatedly supergluing loose or fallen teeth back into her mouth. Instead of fixing the underlying decay and gum disease, the glue trapped bacteria beneath the teeth and caused progressive infections. Over time, the damage became catastrophic, with dentists later finding that up to 90% of the bones supporting her upper teeth had been destroyed. By the time she finally sought treatment, 11 teeth had to be removed, much of her jawbone had deteriorated, and she required extensive reconstructive surgery and dental implants to restore basic oral function. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. Chef Anthony Bourdain often described his life as something he wasn't supposed to still have. In the 1980s, while working as a chef in New York City, he fell into a severe heroin addiction, using daily, stealing from coworkers, and living in a constant state of physical and mental collapse. He later admitted he fully expected to die young during that period and was surprised he survived it at all. When fame arrived years later after writing Kitchen Confidential, Bourdain said that sudden success in many ways was more dangerous than addiction, giving him money, access, and non-stop travel that nearly pulled him back into self-destructive behavior. While filming No Reservations and Parts Unknown, he spent years moving through regions marked by executions, cartel violence, and war, repeatedly confronting death up close until he said it began to feel disturbingly ordinary. Even as his career thrived, Bourdain acknowledged that depression never truly left him, describing it as something that doesn't disappear but waits in the shadows, a statement that would take on a far darker meaning after he took his own life in 2018. Josephine Myrtle was born in 1868 with a rare genetic anomaly known as diphagus. Her body was completely normal down to the waist, but below it she had 2 pelvises and 4 legs. This is what toilets looked like in many medieval castles. There were a few cases of assassins climbing up these poop chutes and waiting for their targets to sit down before killing them. In 1977, the drummer for Lynyrd Skynyrd survived the plane crash that killed half the band. He then walked to a nearby house for help only to be shot by the homeowner. He apparently saw a bloody long-haired man and fired a warning shot that hit the drummer in the shoulder. Once Pyle shouted that there was a crash, the farmer helped him and he went on to fully recover. In the original story of Peter Pan, Peter murders members of the Lost Boys when they grow too old. He did this because being an adult was against the rules in Neverland. In the middle of battles with pirates, Peter would also switch sides to kill members of the Lost Boys just for fun. Up until the 1800s, Turkish women who were accused of cheating on their husbands were tied up in a sack filled with cats, then thrown in the ocean. In 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was kidnapped while hitchhiking in California. She was locked in a box the size of a coffin under her kidnapper's bed for 7 years. She had to lie still and couldn't make any noise for 23 hours a day in pitch-black darkness. Her kidnapper was only caught when his wife finally reported him to police. Steve Jobs could have avoided a premature death from cancer by having it properly treated. Instead, he refused surgery for 9 months and favored dietary treatments and other alternatives. Shortly before he died, he claimed that it was one of his biggest life regrets. With a 9% fatality rate, being the president is by far the most dangerous job in America. Hours before his death, Edgar Allan Poe was acting delirious in the streets of Baltimore. He was wearing another man's clothing and was unable to explain how he got there. While many ideas have been put forth, his cause of death remains a mystery to this day. In 2018, a 66-year-old Canadian man was arrested for murdering 8 people over a 7-year span. During that time, he worked as a mall Santa in Toronto. In 1932 Arizona, a man dressed as Santa Claus jumped out of a plane to parachute into a Christmas parade. Sadly, his parachute failed to open and hundreds of parents had to cover their kids' eyes as Santa plunged plummeted to his death. This is a photo of a man dressed as Santa Claus visiting dying workplace children in a hospital ward in 1906. In December of 1980, a 19-year-old girl from Minnesota was involved in a car accident in sub-zero temperatures. After the crash, her car wouldn't start, so she walked towards a friend's house who lived 2 miles away. When she was just 15 feet from her friend's front door, she collapsed. That night, temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, and no one was around to help her. 6 hours later, she was discovered frozen solid. She was immediately transported to a nearby hospital, but her skin was too hard to even pierce with a needle. Amazingly, she was still alive, but her pulse was only measured at 12 beats per minute. Hoping for a miracle, doctors wrapped her in a heated blanket, and 2 hours later, she regained consciousness. After 49 days in the hospital, she completely recovered and suffered no permanent damage to any part of her body. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists wanted to open up the tomb of Timur, aka Tamerlane. He was a Turco-Mongol conqueror from the 14th century who is often regarded as one of the greatest military leaders of all time. However, locals urged the Soviets not to do so since it was believed that opening the tomb would curse the world. This was mainly due to the inscription on his tomb which read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." And inside his casket, there was another mysterious note that read, "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." But despite the warnings, Joseph Stalin ordered for Tamerlane's body to be exhumed. Just 3 days later, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union. In 2017, a billionaire from Brazil announced that he was gonna bury his Bentley for his afterlife. After receiving a lot of online hate for his wasteful decision, he revealed that it was simply a publicity stunt for organ donations. He said people bury things that are much more valuable than cars and nobody seems to care. Patty Mallet became pregnant at age 17 and was pressured by multiple people to abort the baby, but she refused. That baby was Justin Bieber. The Titanic fired 8 emergency flares before it sank. A ship in the area saw the flares and that the boat looked uneven in the water. But the captain didn't believe that the rockets were fired in distress, so he didn't take action. If he had, all of the Titanic's passengers could have been rescued, but instead help didn't arrive for more than 2 hours. In 1856, a woman died just after giving birth to a Greek monk named Mihailo Tolotos. The very next day, the baby was taken to a monastery on top of Mount Athos. He then spent his entire 82-year life completely isolated from women. He's the only known man in history to have lived and died without ever seeing a woman. While this may look like a regular city upon first glance, it's actually the world's largest cemetery. Located in Iraq, the Valley of Peace contains over 5 million bodies. Joseph Matheny was a serial killer from Baltimore who was active from the 1970s till the 1990s. Following his arrest, Joseph not only confessed to killing numerous men and women, he also claimed that he used their meat in the burgers that he sold out of his food truck. This is a comparison of a pug in 1880 versus what the breed looks like today. The pug was selectively bred to feature an extremely flat face, which has contributed to severe breathing difficulties as well as eye problems in many of these dogs. If a person dies on a plane during a flight, their body is typically moved to an empty first-class seat until the plane lands. After the Titanic disaster, the U.S. Congress passed a law requiring passenger vessels to carry more lifeboats. But the added weight made one ship called the SS Eastland too top-heavy. In 1915, the ship capsized before even leaving the dock, killing 844 people. This is a photo of Anne Frank's father, Otto, revisiting the attic where they hid from the Nazis. Sadly, he was the only surviving member of the family as his 2 daughters died just weeks before their camp was liberated. In 1783, a boy was born with 2 heads, but one of the heads was upside down. Surprisingly, the other head was somewhat functional, and the boy even claimed that he could hear the other brain talking to him. Tigers are some of the most vengeful animals on the planet and will take revenge on anyone who has wronged them. In 1997, a Russian poacher shot a tiger and left him for dead before stealing part of his meal. The tiger later found the poacher's cabin and waited 12 hours for him to arrive before killing and eating him. In the 1920s, not much was known about the effects of radium, so when a group of women were paid to use glow-in-the-dark radioactive paint, they were told that it was completely harmless. But after years of licking the tips of their paintbrushes while using this radium-based paint, the devastating effects eventually became obvious. Many of these women developed a condition known as radium jaw, which caused horrible tumors around the mouth, and some of their jaws would literally fall off. The ancient Romans would often substitute criminals into plays for punishment. So if a character died in the story, a real criminal would die on stage. The ancient Aztecs built swords out of obsidian, which is said to be 50 times sharper than surgical steel. These swords were apparently sharp enough to decapitate not only a human with one strike, but also a horse. The scold's bridle was a device that was used to publicly humiliate women until the 19th century. On the inside, the device had a metal plate that would press down on the tongue and prevent the wearer from speaking. It was placed on women who were said to be troublesome to keep them quiet and prevent them from gossiping. This is a powerful photo of a starving Ugandan boy holding the hand of a missionary in 1980. For many years, the lead singer of Lynyrd Skynyrd told his bandmates that he wouldn't live to the age of 30. His dad reported that even when he was a child, Ronnie would often say, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old." When his father asked why he kept saying this, Ronnie would just reply, "Daddy, that's my limit." Sure enough, when he was 29 years old, Ronnie Van Zant died in a plane crash. This photo was taken on the morning of April 15th, 1912, just a few miles south of where the Titanic went down. The steward who took the photo had not yet heard about the sinking of the Titanic. What caught his attention was the smear of red paint across the base of the iceberg, indicating that it had collided with a ship. Little did he know there were about 1,500 dead bodies in the depths below him. In 1962, a Cuban boxer named Benny Perret made fun of his opponent Emil Griffith for being a homosexual. Griffith ended up beating Perret so badly that he fell into a coma and died 10 days after the fight. In 2007, a woman woke up in the middle of a surgery where doctors were removing one of her eyes. She was aware of everything going on for hours but couldn't tell the doctors to stop. She says the experience was so horrific that she thought she had died and gone to hell. As horrible as the Holocaust was, one man truly stood out as one of the most evil of all Nazis involved. Dr. Joseph Mengele was tasked with conducting genetic research on human subjects at Auschwitz concentration camp. His work focused primarily on twins, with very little regard for the safety or suffering of his patients. Some of his horrific experiments included removing organs without anesthesia, injecting toxic dye into eyeballs, and even sewing twins together at the skin. Most of his patients ended up dying after these operations, but those who didn't often wished they had. What's perhaps most disturbing is that after the Holocaust, Dr. Mengele escaped to South America, where many say he continued his brutal experiments in a less organized manner. He lived for more than 30 years after the end of the war and died on a beach in Brazil. In 1969, an astrologer warned John Lennon that he would be shot on an island. John was so disturbed by this that it caused him to cancel an upcoming yacht trip around the Greek islands. 11 years later, John Lennon would be shot and killed on the island of Manhattan. The day after Robin Williams died, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline received the highest number of calls in its history. It is estimated that there are still approximately 40 million slaves in the world today. About 70% of them are women, while 25% of them are children. The Bunker brothers were a pair of conjoined twins who made the term Siamese twins popular. They were a famous sideshow act in North Carolina until one day one of the brothers woke up to find that his twin had died. In a panic, he called for a doctor to perform an emergency separation, but it was already too late. He would die just 3 hours after his brother. You can literally die from pooping too hard, and it's actually pretty common. Nearly all cases involve people with bad hearts, who just pushed a little too hard. One of the most notable people who died this way is Elvis Presley. Up until the 1950s, cigarettes were used to treat people with asthma along with other pulmonary conditions. 30 years ago, you had about 17 minutes to escape a house fire. Today, that's down to about 3 to 4 minutes due to many of the highly flammable synthetic materials used in furniture. After a mass shooting, you would expect complete silence at the scene of the crime. But police say one of the eeriest things is all of the phones that ring when family members are trying to find out if their loved ones are okay.